7th, 2022 Planning Commission Committee of the Whole meeting. This committee provides an opportunity to have an in-depth conversation on items contained on the agenda. Items referred to the committee are usually deemed inconsistent with the 2030 comp plan. The committee discussion is less formal as compared to the Planning Commission meeting, and there are generally no time limits for speakers. Just a note for that, we've got several members of the public that are going to speak, that have signed up to speak for the Western Boulevard Corridor Study. I'd like to make a note we don't have a time limit for that or for any case, but I just want to be cognizant of our time and limit conversation to being new and kind of keep repetitive conversation at a minimum. So if any participants have issue with the technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ira Mabel. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. Today, we have 5 agenda items to talk about. 2 items have been previously discussed at prior meetings. Before we get started, I would like to change the discussion items as presented in the agenda due to the number of members on the public signed up to speak. I would like to address first the Western Boulevard Corridor Study and Comprehensive Plan Amendment CP 1021. Moving on second to the rezoning Z6821, 1624 Glenwood Avenue near the intersection of Fairview Road. Third, moving on to Capitol Boulevard Corridor Study Plan. And then fourth, rezoning Z6021 on Tryon Road near the intersection of Silver Moon Lane. Without any objection from the committee, this will be the order of discussion. Do we have any objection to that change? Okay, seeing none. Also, the bylaws, the Planning Commission bylaws are listed as discussion items. The bylaws have previously appeared on the Committee of the Whole agenda, but we have not discussed it yet. These items were one of the products from last year's Planning Commission's retreat. With the updates, they're mostly non-substantive. I want to be cognizant that the commissioners have adequate time to consider these changes and hear these changes. I recommend that the commission name a special purpose committee that could meet to discuss the bylaws in a targeted fashion. This committee would meet once to discuss the bylaws and consist of four Planning Commission members and have staff oversight. Chair Fox, Mr. Crane, myself will make a recommendation as to when this special committee meeting will occur and the members consistent of that committee. By show of hands, I would like to handle this Planning Commission special committee bylaws by a special committee meeting. All right, so what we'll do is we'll set up a time, and Travis, myself, and Commissioner Fox and Chair Fox will discuss times for a potential meeting to have a special committee to discuss the bylaws, and we'll have about 3 to 4 members and that we'll name, and we'll get back to you guys on that. Thank you. Moving on, the first discussion item that we'll talk about again is the Western Boulevard Corridor Study and Comp Plan Amendment CP 1021. Daniel Sandeep from Planning and Development will give a staff presentation. I understand that there are a lot of people from the public that would like to speak, and again, just be cognizant of time. And also understand that there's been a city staff meeting with the public, and we'd like to hear the outcomes of that meeting. Danya.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Danya Sandeep with Planning and Development with the Urban Design Center. So I'm here today representing the Wake BRT Western Boulevard Corridor Study. I do want to acknowledge a couple of my colleagues who are here with me today, Jason Myers from Transportation Planning and Het Patel from Transit Division. They have been our key partners on this planning effort and are here to provide their expertise to this discussion. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to bring this item back for discussion. It was last discussed at the November 18th Committee of the Whole meeting, where my colleague, Carly Stevenson, she presented a great overview of the project. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over all of that presentation, but I did include all of those slides in your backup materials. So if you ever want to go back and reference, we can get back to that. So today, we're going to really touch on some key updates from our last last meeting and also get into some discussion about a couple of outstanding items that came out of the public hearing from the last meeting. Next. So I want to start off by reminding the committee that since the last meeting in November, we did get a 60-day time extension that was approved by Council for Planning Commission's review of this item. So the new deadline for Planning Commission review and action is February 10th. That essentially makes it necessary that the committee should act either today, or if that does not happen, we need to request another time extension for this item. And then, as I mentioned, Jason Myers from Transportation Planning is prepared to delve a little more into the couple of street amendments that we've heard a lot of concerns and comments from. Next. So quick recap, again, the Western Corridor study is focused on the area you see on the map between downtown Raleigh and I-40, again, sticking within Raleigh's jurisdiction. On the map, you also see the locally preferred alternative that was selected, and the dots are the proposed BRT stations. We also include about half-mile radius where we were looking at larger connectivity issues and finding ways to integrate the surrounding neighborhoods and areas to the BRT improvements along this corridor. I do want to note, you see the dotted line on the map, that is the new Western Boulevard extension area. And I know today we'll be talking a little more about that new extension, the Jones-Franklin intersection. Again, what I want to point out is that this existing street networks we have in that area was put back in very early 70s. And of course, now with the upgrade to a new BRT route, we are looking at new opportunities and new potential for shaping that future growth in a more transit-oriented or transit-friendly manner. Next. So the key recommendations, again, how do we intend to take them forward for implementation? So we do have an implementation matrix of capital improvement projects. Again, all of those improvements that you see through the study report are itemized, and they complement the BRT investments. So we do have a matrix of that. We do have action plan items that are follow-up items that we think needs further additional study or analysis or additional collaboration partnership with other agencies. And then, of course, we have CP 1021 package, which we have already seen in a package. These have new policies and action items that will go into a new area plans section for Western Corridor. And we also have amendments to the street plan map as well as the bike facilities map. Next. So this is a holistic map, again, looking and showing some of the key new street connections we are proposing for the entire corridor. Again, what we have done here works very closely with our transportation planning staff. And what we have looked here is identifying some really critical connections that would be really important to enhance overall mobility options, enhance overall connectivity and access into the BRT corridor. And I want to call out again, you would notice that there is additional street connections to the west, the Carries connector zone, because that is the area, again, which is new and which needs some additional analysis. And that's why we have focused on laying that foundation and framework for street network in that area. Next. Then we also took an extensive look at all of the pedestrian bicycle facilities and connections, because that was a high priority identified by the community. So again, we make a lot of new connections, proposed connections, also connecting to greenways, potential greenway connections that could also tie in with future bicycle networks. Next. And then we have area-specific guidance, which are, again, looking at very neighborhood-specific smaller connections, which are not going to be showing on the street plan map, but they are essential connections that could enhance overall connectivity. And so we call them out so that these can happen incrementally as redevelopment occurs over time. Next. So I want to finish up here with just a little context to the planning that we have done in the past. So there's a lot of discussion that will happen today around the Jones Franklin area. And I just wanted to provide a little context. So this area was largely studied more in detail back in 2011, what we call the Jones Franklin Western Hillsborough area study. And one of the key recommendations I've called out here is how the plan calls out for creating a strong multimodal transit hub at this intersection. The study recognizes that this is one of the key critical nexus of several transit modes. When we talk about transit modes, we have Cary Transit, the Triangle Transit, as well as Raleigh Transit, and many ample opportunities to connect between jurisdictions and key regional attractions. And so recommendation was there to have additional infrastructure improvements that should be prioritized to strengthen the district's connectivity. And what we are doing through this planning study is essentially aligning with that larger goal that was established more than a decade ago for the area. And on the slide, you also see land use recommendations. The not look at land use recommendations simply because we are planning to do that at the station area planning through the station area planning process that's upcoming in the near future. But again, tying back to that area, we do have recommendations for community mixed use. As you can see, there's also specific policy recommendations for mixed use, for aligning, orienting buildings to new public streets or existing public streets, and also finding ways to make the area much more walkable and transit friendly. Next. Next. And then this is one, just back one slide to that illustration, to rendering, yes. And this is one of the slides, visuals from that study. Again, I want to call out, you can see the shopping center site here, which is again the key intersection we're talking about. And again, the vision was to add in more density, have more buildings edge on streets, and having more walkable fabric and urban fabric, and some of the visuals talk to that. And in addition to that, we also had the recent equitable development around transit study that was adopted a year ago. And do want to call out for this area, for this station node, is designated as an emerging urban center, and really talks about how mixed use is important, and also recommending up to 12-story height, and again transitioning to about 3 to 4 stories as you get closer to neighborhoods. So with that context, I'm now going to turn it over to Jason Myers from Transportation Planning, who's going to deep dive a little more into the two areas of concern that we heard from our last hearing as it relates to specific street plan amendments. Jason, yours.
Thank you, Danya. As Danya said, my name is Jason Myers. I'm in the transportation department of the city. A part of the package of amendments you have to the comp plan in front of you are to the street plan, which is map T1 in the comp plan. That image on the right of this slide is that map in the comp plan book, which most people look at as a flipping book online these days, but it is kind of a publication in its entirety. The purpose of the street plan and of these amendments is to help shape connectivity, kind of set access and the shape of development over time. Developments that do a tier 3 site plan or a subdivision are required to dedicate that right of way and to construct it. And that has been a consistent part of our code for quite a while, though the tiers of site plans is relatively new. That helps provide some consistency across developments and some certainty between different property owners as development happens, and that these street types are context sensitive streets. And that one of the main things is that having a well-connected street grid helps reduce vehicle miles traveled and improves walkability, which is very much the reason to add some additional streets in this area. Next slide, please. So there are a couple existing comprehensive plan policies that help support the use of the street plan and a well-connected street grid. I will not read these, but these are a few different things in both the transportation and the land use section of the existing comp plan. Next slide, please. And this is the part of the set of street plan amendments that we are especially focused on this afternoon, because there's been two different sets of feedback. And I'm going to go through both of those together. On the left of your screen is the existing street plan. That's what's in the comp plan today. And on the right is what's in CP 10C 21, which adds a number of new streets, both designating existing streets and adding new proposed streets, and also changes the designation of some existing places in the street plan. There's a star there on Field Spring Lane connection, which is where I will talk about first. Next slide. So this is just a picture of two different street standards from our Unified Development Ordinance and our Raleigh Street Design Manual. On the left is a neighborhood street. It's a little bit wider, 36-foot wide section that allows for two-way traffic to pass while there's on-street parking in an older kind of functional classification system, which Raleigh doesn't directly use anymore. We might call this a neighborhood collector. Where on the right is our smallest street standard, which does not allow for two-way traffic to pass on-street parking. This is a very common street section in some of our older neighborhoods, like those around Five Points and Cameron Park, as for instance, in many places inside the Beltline. And this is not a street that shows up in the street plan. Next slide. So this is zooming in a little bit on Field Spring Lane, and what you can see is that Field Spring is a cul-de-sac of a number of single-family homes with a low income, or I'm sorry, restricted income, restricted age apartment complex at the end of the cul-de-sac that was developed at the same time as the neighborhood. And so in the next slide, you can see what that looks like from the end of the cul-de-sac looking back to the north. Note that there's a sidewalk that ends there on the right at the cul-de-sac. And the street is approximately 27-foot wide back of curb to back of curb. So it's that, right now it's of that condition of being a neighborhood yield. And then the next slide turns our view around and faces that apartment community, where you can see that the internal sidewalk network of the apartment complex kind of connects to that cul-de-sac. And so in your agenda materials and in board docs, there is a memo dated October 21st, 2021 that details 4 different options for Field Spring of how Planning Commission might change the plan or might not. And go to the next slide, please. And this lays out what those are. I'm not going to go into all the details of the pros and the cons that are in the memo of every given option. But the 4 options are to keep the recommendation as in the current CP 10C 21. Number 2 would be to remove Field Spring Lane and the proposed street from the street plan map, but to put in a connection of some sort. And Planning Commission might say something about what they want that connection to look like in the area specific guidance map, along with many of the open space and bike ped connection and smaller, more urban design focused street connections. In number 2, that would be a street, and in number 3, that would be a bike ped connection. Now, the main thing I want to point out in terms of both a pro and a con, or a difference between those 2 options, is that a street shown in the area specific guidance map has a mechanism through which it can be required of a tier 3 site plan. The bike ped connection does not. So that is kind of a rezoning guidance only thing, or maybe an indication to city council that there's a capital project that the plan would like to see in that area. The 4th option just removes any guidance for this area in its entirety. And I can certainly answer questions and go into depth about those, but I want to respect the commission's time. So next slide. And now I'm going to turn my attention to the Plaza West Shopping Center, which is the same area, or is very close at the intersection of Jones Franklin, Buck Jones, and Western Boulevard. And you've gotten some feedback. I think first time we heard it was at the December Committee of the Whole meeting. And there's been a couple of meetings between staff and representatives of that property in the time since. And I'll go into some details there. Next slide, please. This street, or the streets that are being discussed here, are Main Street parallel parking, consistent with a mixed use and very commercial, active street front sort of development pattern. The example I like to use is Hargett Street, because I think it's one of the better streets in Raleigh that both exemplifies this design and is something that most people in Raleigh are familiar with. And that's our current standard for Main Street parallel parking. Next slide, please. And so now we're zoomed in here. What you'll notice is that Hunt Club Lane is a apartment community that was developed at the same time as a shopping center. And then there's a couple of out parcels that I believe were also developed at the same time. Those are now in separate ownership, which is something staff as we've drilled in and looked at details, have now understand differently than I think big picture view we had before. Next slide, please. And so this is a view looking into the Plaza West Shopping Center, out of the right of way and basically into the driveway to that shopping center. And basically the proposal in the street plan as is in front of you today is to convert this into a public street and to line it with buildings, and also through redevelopment to connect it to the apartments in the neighborhood behind. I'll remind the commission that there is a city park property down in this access, and that the idea is to convert this driveway into an extension of Barstow. I can't remember if it's lane or drive, but it's an existing public right of way that has that city park to help provide access to this, to the commercial that we expect to be here and that is here now, to those neighborhoods in the other direction and to the open spaces in there. Next slide also takes street view and kind of gives you an inside the shopping center view looking back to the intersection of Jones Franklin and Buck Jones. You can see their parking lot, one of the office buildings that's on an out parcel, and the grade change between the that's all basically up against the right of way between the streets and the parking lot. And then the next slide. So one of the things that we have in looking at this and understanding the concerns and thinking a lot about the property ownership, have proposed potentially changing the design of this street system in the street plan to be more specific to how it's likely to be implemented. I think that staff expected, when looking at this area at a very high level and corridor wide, thought that this area would likely redevelop as one entire redevelopment. Maybe those apartments, certainly all the different out parcels of the shopping center at the same time. And that alignment that was previously, it's currently in CP10C, is kind of general to allow that redevelopment to decide exactly how the site designers want to lay out those streets, and that they're really a function. The street plan is meant to provide a to and a from and just a broad topology of what the network should look like, and that the alignment of those things can change quite a bit. In understanding that the out parcels are different ownership, understanding the grades where it is and where it's already graded for connections, and understanding a little bit more about how that might develop, this might be a more specific way that it would be most likely to be constructed through redevelopment, and implies a lot less impact to the shopping center and to the area as a whole, because it's converting existing access ways mostly into new streets. And so this is something that if the commission would like us to do, we might be able to amend the comp plan petition. I don't know exactly the timing of when we can do that. That's a question for either Danya or Travis. But this is maybe a technical way that still meets the intent of the Western Boulevard Corridor Study, but addresses some of the concerns from the owners of Plaza West. And with that, I also have Het Patel is also on the line, who is in bus rapid transit planning, and that Het, myself, and Danya can answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Before we move it to the public for comment, can you guys give a brief outcome of what happened at that planning at the meeting with the public regarding the street plan?
I'm sorry, which meeting with the public?
There was a meeting scheduled between yesterday. I'm sorry.
Okay. So yesterday in person, Danya and I met with Jenny Chung, who is one of the owners of the Plaza West Shopping Center, and a friend of hers who helped just through the conversation. And we talked a lot about what the intent of the plan was. We showed them the map that I just showed you of a potential different way or more specific way to design it. We answered a lot of questions about how the street plan is implemented and when it's triggered. Got into more detail about the tiers of site plans. So to be clear, Donnie and I aren't in the site plan review business, so we had to defer those a little bit to what we understood we heard from an earlier virtual meeting that had also Jenny, but many of her family members and a planner that is working with them.
Thanks, Jason. Ira, can we please open up the floor to guests ready to speak to this case?
Sure. In no particular order, then we can go to Ms. Chen.
Okay. Ms. Chen.
Go ahead, Jenny.
And please,
Yeah.
before you speak, please state your name and address for the record.
Okay, hi, this is Kirjan Chen, Jenny Chen, and I'm the owner of Plaza West Shopping Center. I bought it back to 2018. We certainly appreciate the city plan to have the transportation go through that area. But when I saw the design that the street need to go right across to my shopping center, I really in a big shock. And that I talked to a friend of mine is a developer, and he just mentioned a big issue is once the bank see the design there, and we are not going to get any financial gain, not able to get any loan for that. And here I'm thinking if we can make the street goes around the shopping center, since there's lots of street close by, and we can use that. And certainly when we are in the development for the shopping center, new image in maybe 20, 30 years, I think we definitely will make street to go through, and we definitely will support the traffic. But the design could be a little bit different from currently just cut right straight through the shopping center. I think for the development idea wise, a big chunk, a big consecutive area together will be easier for developer. And if it's being cut through the center, I think my shopping center going to be no value at all. I appreciate if everyone can consider that situation for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. Ira, can you please present the next speaker?
Okay, we can go next to Agnes Lamb. Go ahead, Agnes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Actually, I'm friend of Jenny, and also I know the probably a little bit, and I think that yesterday the conversation is like we understand the change we needed, and as Jenny said, the consideration is it something that will if that's the road being cut through the whole shopping center, and especially the size of the shopping center is not so big, and the land will be chopped into two pieces, and that will have a big impact on the value of the properties. That's one thing. And the other thing is, we understand the amendment, but when we look at the property itself, that the Main Street connection have to be coordinated with the other land behind us, the Hunter Glen apartment, in order to achieve the whole plan purpose. Am I right? Because if they are not doing any right road behind it, that's is that's no it doesn't really make any it will not accommodate with the purpose of the main street. So when we look at the properties at the apartment complex behind us, it doesn't seem very feasible that they will be doing redevelopment or going to tear down the building and build a road. So if that means the property actually sold in 2019 for almost 17 million, and now the owner being renovate the property and increase the rent a lot. the value of the it become a more high-ended rental property now. So I work on some number because I'm a realtor too. I work on some number about how much the property will worth. I think at least right now the property worth around 30 million. So I can hardly imagine that people will try to buy the property and lay down to redevelop the whole neighborhood, and then they will be forced to. Then they will need to add that tree in order to complete the plan. So
Could I interrupt
it,
for just a moment?
sure.
Is there any way staff could pull up a picture of the map so we could see which parcels? I imagine might be helpful for several speakers. So we can see exactly which parcels they're referring to and streets.
Sure. Let me get there.
I think it's better to show the amendment street plan, then you will see exactly how the main street will go through the properties. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Lam, are you finished? Or
Yeah,
do you,
yeah. Can I
okay.
continue? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
please continue.
So my point is like, if that's nothing really, this is the plan, but when you look at the reality, it probably, to me, I've been doing the real estate for 20 years, over 20 years, and in a Cary, Raleigh area only. So I can hardly imagine that people will pay like 30 million and try to tear down the properties and redevelop the whole thing and try to create at least a value over $100 million in order to make sense. Because when you tear down, you have to put a lot more money to build and generate income. So even though this is on the plan, I would think it's probably not able to complete if without the property behind us. So that means is that something not going to be happen or very barely be happen, and still have to do that planning on the map? It's just not fair to the owner at Plaza West, because it hurt them in that way, but it's not going. Even though if they will redevelop in the future, then they do the road like that, it doesn't. It's no use. And then at the end, who's going to maintain the road? City, right? Because this is like a city street, if I get it right. Then it's not going to connect what it's supposed to be, but then the city have to spend the money to maintain the road for the people that they are not going to use it as it's supposed to be. I think that's my point. Yeah. So
Ms. Lam,
is it, yeah. Okay.
okay. Are you finished with your comments, Ms. Lam?
Thing. I'm not sure, because when I look at the proposed, that's a 4-lane going down from Buck Jones to Jones Rankins and then turn right to Western Boulevard. So is that not good enough to take care of the traffic? Or I don't know, is, to me, Western Boulevard at that junction already starting to have 6 lanes. I think it's pretty sufficient. And also the size of Pathway is not that big. Even though with 2-story or 3-story building, it won't be generate a huge, humongous, or like a big traffic burden to the whole area. That's why I look at it. So it's more like, is it reasonable or sensible to make that change that may not be happen at all, but will hurt the the property owner in a very unfair consideration. Yeah,
Thank you,
that's it.
Ms.
Thank you.
Lam. Thank you. Ira, can you put the map back up, and then please present the next speaker?
Sure. I'll do it in the other order if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fine.
Next is Martha Lee.
Hello guys, I live on 117 Field Spring Lane, and I'm very disturbed about this intention to make our street into a neighbor street and connect it to Jones Franklin, because we have very small properties to begin with. You would have to take a pretty good chunk of my front yard. I have grandkids that love to come to play at grandma's house, and they will not be safe to play for them playing in the front yard. And this is the first house I ever owned. I bought it in part because it was on a cul-de-sac and it was a quiet street. And I was hoping this would be the last house I owned, but I'm afraid that this thing may drive me out of the neighborhood if I'll even be able to sell the house at the fair value, because I'm pretty sure this is going to hurt the property values. That's all I have to say. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, ma'am. Ira, can you please present the next speaker?
Sure, sorry. Next we have Steve Burt. Let me find you there. There you go, Steve.
Hi, thanks, Ira. It's okay if it's a technical challenge. I also submitted materials that I would love to show
I'm
as
good.
well.
I should be able to get them for you.
Okay, thank you. I can see it. That looks great. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Well, hi everybody. Hi Planning Commission. My name is Steve Burt. I live in your community at 124 Field Spring Lane. Similar level of disturbance and just anxiety that Martha's experiencing. I'm really here today because really one small non-essential component of the Western BRT Boulevard corridor has huge potential ramifications for my family and my neighbors. So I think all of us are pretty aware of the proposal to amend the street plan on Field Spring. But just to reiterate, it would be a widening of the street as well as bulldozing a new road connection from Field Spring to Jones Franklin Road. And what we're really worried about is that this plan would make our street a cut-through street, basically bringing in traffic, air pollution, noise pollution, water runoff, and it would necessitate the death and removal of approximately 30 trees, as well as the loss of safety for our children, our seniors, and families, as cars would use our street and come essentially up to our front doors, really just to avoid the traffic signal at Buck Jones and Jones Franklin Road. And I think the costs are easy to enumerate, and they would be felt directly by our losses in property value and our diminished quality of life. But the benefits would be minimal, offering really only a minute or two of travel time reduction for outside vehicle traffic to cut through to avoid that traffic signal that I mentioned. So, in addition to that loss of peace in our homes, one traffic collision could potentially destroy the lives of our families in our neighborhood. So if you don't mind turning to the next slide, I just wanted to, or actually you can skip this one and go to the one after that. I just wanted to say, I am just one voice, but I'm a voice from a group of 41 people on Field Spring Lane who have signed a petition in the hopes to prevent the proposal to amend the street plan right here on Field Spring. And many of us against the plan also include our seniors living at Meadow Spring Apartment who feel they don't have a real voice as renters on the block. We have been in a lot of discussion with Danya Sandeep, Jason Meyer, City of Raleigh Senior Transportation Planners, who are fully aware of our concerns. And I do greatly appreciate their willingness to engage with us. Public input is a key foundation of effective and inclusive planning. And they have taken the time not just to hear us out to check a box, but have actually meaningfully responded to our question emails and have drafted a memo that's aimed at addressing our concerns. And I think, you can probably skip all the way to the last slide that I have here. I just wanted to say that really, on behalf of our neighborhood, I've spoken to the neighbors. We really do have a consensus that either option 3 or option 4 in the memo would be widely embraced. I know there's a little bit more hesitation around option 3, but really either of those options that would preserve our neighborhood character as a place for safety for our children and our seniors, for myself, my wife, my family. Either of those options would be embraced, and we really appreciate the consideration of both City of Raleigh planners as well as the Planning Commission as they hear our case here today. Thank you for even taking the 60 days to reconsider this part of the proposal. And again, most of us on the block are really excited about the potential of a BRT corridor. Just don't see necessarily see the need for a cut-through street and more vehicular traffic as running parallel with the goals of multimodal transportation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Burt, for your comments. Ira, can you please present the next speaker?
I believe that is all of the speakers signed up who are. No, I take that back. We have Blake Boland.
Okay.
Blake, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Mr.
I
Boland,
apologize.
please.
I joined a little bit late. I do
Sorry.
apologize, everybody. My name is Blake Boland. I live at 113 Field Spring Lane. I believe that's how we did it at the last meeting, so I think y'all want that information again. Like Steve was saying, the entire neighborhood, the Field Spring Lane neighborhood, is really looking at option 3 or 4. We don't have a very big square footage for our houses already. Taking more space from that front, from our front easements would really get us right to the front of our steps, really. Also, I'm sorry, I've joined late here, but also the water runoff issue. Neighbors that lived on this street for a long time remember, there was a really bad water runoff. Actually, I had a new retaining wall built at the front of this property a while back because the water runoff was eroding the front yard. So there is a water runoff issue there. I also wanted to bring up too, we do have the senior housing at the end of the street here at Field Spring. And so if you did want to consider option 3, then that would, in my view, and hopefully y'all's as well, that would add a new section for those seniors down there to enjoy, and possibly even create an area where they could start gardens and things of that nature to help themselves. A lot of them, are walking to the grocery store, which would help them cut through to get there quicker. But that's an actual street going through there would actually hinder their ability to get up the street. And also, I'm pretty sure I heard Steve just mention, I know me and my wife are looking to start a family, and there's already several little kids in the neighborhood that I know my neighbor directly across the street has kids playing in the front yard all the time. That would essentially eliminate that if the street was widened and brought down Field Spring. That's really all I had to say. I appreciate y'all's time. And again, I'm sorry for joining the conversation late here.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. Seeing no other comments from the public, I'd like to bring it back to the table.
Sorry, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have one last one.
Okay.
Who is not signed up but has indicated he wishes to speak. It's Mr. Steve Kirkanis.
Okay.
That's all right.
Mr. Cardenas, can you please state your
All
name?
right, Mr. Man, Steve Kirkanis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, very good. I am at 555 Fayetteville Street with Womble Bond Dickinson. I'm in the planning group there, and Womble represents the owners of the shopping center and also the shopping center management company. Jeff Jones has worked most closely one of our planners, with the owners and also with staff, but he is ill today, and I was asked to step in if possible and participate in the meeting. Could you possibly pull up the slide from the that Danya showed? It's the land use component of the Jones Franklin West Hillsborough small area plan from 2011.
Sure. Sorry, give me a moment for that.
The one right below that, please. Yeah, this slide here, I think really does show a much more likely scenario as far as interim development at the shopping center. The proposed road, the main street, is that current driveway that extends down off of Jones Franklin Road in the middle of the shopping center. If you're familiar with it, that's where the Harris Teeter is. And it would, it's shown on the plan to bisect and go not just through the shopping center property, but through the buildings proper, which we know won't happen. That's anticipating some substantial redevelopment in the future and continuing on through the residential neighborhood behind. In 2011, I will note that the Western BRT study did not reference or factor in the 2011 Jones Franklin and West Hillsborough small area plan, which obviously, as you can see from this, included a whole lot of public involvement and a lot of public participation. It was also very transit-centric. Then, however, it was more rail-oriented. Now we're dealing with BRT. There are about 3 football fields separated from each other. The scenario here with the buildings up against Jones Franklin is in all likelihood a much more likely interim scenario in that the main buildings in the shopping center are mid-1980s buildings. They're in pretty good condition, but they certainly need to be modernized, spiffed up, and refreshed. And so it does thwart an effort to do that, where we show, as Jenny said, the problems with lenders and the like, where you have a street shown through the building. So we do feel that this is a much more likely scenario. Don't know that it's likely that we're going to be taking housing out the neighborhood, which was built about the same time, and likely workforce affordable housing, even if it's on a rental basis, and putting a large road through that neighborhood. I think if anything, a much shorter stretch of road that would be where that very small segment is, next to the new buildings that are shown up next to Jones Franklin, should be the extent of any road alignment at this time. I actually think a mixed-use street would be better than a main street, because there's a tremendous amount of slope here. It's 20 feet, 2 stories down from the street to the finished floor elevation of the buildings. And so that would be a difficult place for people to park and open their doors and open the vans and the like and get in and out. I'm all for urbanizing this area, but I think it's going to be something that happens over a longer period of time as opposed to a shorter period of time. In conversations with Jeff and my colleagues at Womble, and I am a land planner there, not an attorney, I would note that I think that the owners would be very willing to consider a cross-access agreement at the rear of the shopping center to support anything that may happen in the rear where those apartments are at such time that happens. So we would ask that you consider terminating that, at most terminating the street at the end of the current driveway that was shown in that picture a few minutes ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkanis. Ira, do we have any more members of the public willing to speak?
No, sir, that was the last one.
Okay, seeing no other members of the public willing to speak, let's bring it back to the table. and hear from the committee if we have any questions or comments regarding what we just saw. Chair Fox.
A question, if staff could remind me the heights that we're anticipating at the Plaza West location?
Yes, so I know back in the days, we had some recommendations for community mixed use from the old Jones Franklin Road, but I do want to point out that we had a recent equitable development around transit plan that was approved just less than a year ago, and that specifically looked at opportunities around transit and identifying transit BRT stations. So this location is designated as an emerging urban center, and the definition talks about mixed uses and also as tall as 12-story. And in some cases where you do have the appropriate context, it could go also as high as 20 stories, but also calls for appropriate transition to surrounding neighborhoods. So that's that's kind of the most recent interpretation of land use that we have.
And then another follow-up question too, with the proposed text change to remove parking requirements in mixed-use districts, it changes the relationship to the tiered site plan. How does that weigh into how you review the comp plan and the dotted lines, and when it would be appropriate to insert a street when that exaction is required?
I am actually going to have Jason or someone a little more familiar with the text change address that first, and then I can pick up on the comp plan piece.
I'm not sure that I can answer the question about the pending text change.
Is Travis?
Yeah, I'm not certain that I have full grasp of that either, and I don't know if there's anyone on the call that has information, but we can look into it really quickly.
My other question, and I can wait on that other one, is there a situation, or do you have examples of changing the language about when a street might be appropriate based on not just the tiering of site plans, but going up to a 12-story rezoning? At that time, it might be appropriate, but a site plan that just happens to meet the threshold of a tier 3 and it's just a renovation to an existing structure and an addition or some other component that changes a requirement that puts it in that tier 3 category. Is there a situation where that might be appropriate? Because it's sounding like this might be the first one that I'm aware of.
And now that's a great question. In fact, I think it did come up in our discussions. Is there a better way to, define that? We understand. I don't think we've done something to that effect, but I think it's an opportunity for us to explore because we are expecting, and I think this is just one of the cases along the BRT corridors, we do have several shopping centers, primed up, and I think we will have to tackle this issue one way or the other. And I think it could be something we can definitely look into, Madam Chair, but Jason, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Just to add a tiny bit of context, I think part of the question that the commission and staff and city council have to ask themselves in trying to craft an answer to that is, what is the level of intensity that should trigger a street? And if there was a mechanism, how much floor area would we add when we would then say it would be necessary to add that street? Right now, my understanding is that adding 25% of floor area to a shopping center use still maintains a tier 2 site plan, and that does not require the street to be built. If the building were demolished, they couldn't put a new building back in the alignment of the street under a tier 2 site plan. But if the building that part of the building were to stay in place, there isn't a requirement to demolish a street in a tier, or demolish a building in a tier 2 site plan. So part of the question I would have is 50% the trigger, or is it 100%, or what is that level that becomes appropriate and necessary to then trigger the street? And I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, we could always, this is just an option, is to craft a policy language that could go into the section of the area plan recommendations, is to define that, because we obviously taking a more holistic look to all shopping centers would probably take a text change, but we can certainly look into addressing it in a policy with a policy language if that will address your concerns.
Yeah, and I think just to say it in layman's terms, what I'm
Mhm.
basically saying is there's a dashed line that's on a map, but you ignore it until you're rezoning it for 12 stories. Another way that I've thought about this, a policy related to a requirement of a plan development when a shopping center redevelops, and there's not a dashed line, but there's more of an opportunity to negotiate different components of the master plan as someone's coming through the process. But thank you, Danya, that was very helpful.
Now, you bring up great points. We've kind of dealt with that, but yeah.
Commissioner Bennett, I saw your hand, and then I'll see you, Commissioner Miller, after that.
Thank you. Just to follow up on what Chair Fox just asked, I like the idea of crafting policy language, but if we were to have language that said what would trigger the street, would the dotted line still be there? Because I guess the way Chair Fox just said it in layman's terms, there's a dotted line, but ignore it. Is the financial institution going to do that? Or is it still going to have that impact on the owner? And they're trying to explain, well, it's there, but ignore it because it hasn't been triggered yet. That's my concern, that the line there is having a financial impact on the owner of the property.
Commissioner Fox.
Maybe I see your point. That's an excellent point. I don't know if I can speak to how the financial institution would look at it, but maybe the way to address it, because I know we've seen this on all area plans. Maybe the way to address it is actually in this section of the code dealing with block perimeter. Maybe that's what we actually hone in on, and it's language that's a little bit more clear about how you meet block perimeter by putting in a new roadway, what the trigger mechanism is, and how you need to line up that facility with existing facilities. That's just a thought.
Hearing this discussion, I'm imagining maybe a policy in the area specific guidance that specifically addressed a specific street and could be understood to modify the requirements of that in the street plan. And I think that's a question for Mr. York and or Ms. Hill from the attorney perspective of, is that something that's possible? Can we basically put asterisks in part of our street plan in other parts of our comp plan? From my viewing of using the block perimeter standards through site development, they're not very good at setting a framework between two different properties, and they're already very complicated and hard for land planners and civil engineers and plan reviewers to follow and implement consistently. So I wouldn't look there, but I'm certainly open to other ideas.
Commissioner Miller, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chairman. To add on to Vice Chair Fox's comments, I think that certainly makes sense to create some kind of threshold, perhaps a higher threshold for when the dotted line sort of springs into place and in terms of a requirement for the landowner. The gross floor, changing gross floor area by more than a certain percentage, as you mentioned, or a certain height threshold. I might also add this issue has come up in the past with a commercial building that wanted to build a warehouse on their property, that would have, even though it was a small accessory structure, it technically would have triggered this kind of requirement as well. And so I think I personally am always hesitant about these dotted lines because it is such potentially an onerous and expensive burden to put on a landowner. And so I'm hesitant and reluctant to do that without seeing sort of a compelling government need on why that needs to be there. So I guess a couple things. I'm interested in exploring in this case what that compelling government need is here, just with a little bit more detail for the Field Spring extension in particular. But then when it comes to coming up with a solution, I just wanted to clarify, are we considering potentially trying to draft something now that we could include as part of this plan on what some of those development thresholds would be before the dotted line springs into place?
So if it's okay, I might like to jump in because
These
it
are
sounds
different
like
parts. I wanted to, there are different parts of the question. So maybe I'll first go to Vice Chair Fox's point. Are we trying, I just wanted to clarify, are we potentially trying to draft something now to include in this action to clarify a new threshold for when a development or landowner is required to build that new street or get an amendment or to the street plan?
Commissioner Ranks.
Thanks, Chairman. Commissioner Miller, kind of on that subject, and what Commissioner Fox mentioned is if it is a trigger on a street, there's a neighborhood street, there's a two-lane undivided street, there's a main street. Does it apply to all the streets evenly? Or are we saying there's a different trigger for each one of those street types as well? And that just complicates, that just adds a whole nother level of text change we'd have to address.
Right.
So I guess that's the question to staff. Is it the street that triggers it, or is it what is put on the property that triggers it?
I guess I can just address. I thought, I think Chairperson Fox had mentioned about putting some language in for the shopping center site. So we can definitely do that because that's a little more direct because we're showing it on a shopping center, which is a large site. And if the trigger is to say that the property comes in for a rezoning for a higher density, that's when the street connection would kick in, then we can do that. But I'm not sure if we can come up with the thresholds for any kind of street amendments because the context could be very different, and likewise, the implications depending on the street type could also be very different. So, so we could address that for a shopping center if that's the desire of the committee. But coming back to this Field Spring Lane, I think Jason said he had some comments about the government compelling need for a government case. So Jason, I'll let you speak on that.
Sure, and actually I can answer that Commissioner Miller's question for both of the different street plans that streets we've been talking about. The need for the Field Spring connection is driven mostly by an understanding that the apartments at the end of the street will, in the lifetime of this plan, be redeveloped, and not wanting to add increased density to the end of a cul-de-sac in this neighborhood. I think that option 2 of those 4 options may be the best option to address the concerns about not widening the street or adding, other infrastructure or impacting the houses, while also providing a connection for that increased density to get to Jones Franklin without having to use the cul-de-sac, which would be the case given the way our code is constructed right now. And option 3 would keep all of that traffic, vehicle traffic, adding to the cul-de-sac, but might, depending on how a property owner went through a rezoning process, result in a non-motorized connection. But there is no requirement to do that through a site plan. It's more of a suggestion. On the Barstow to on the Plaza West connection, I think there's a strong public need for the design of this site when it's redeveloped. And as we talked about, that could be much higher than 2 or 3 stories, be up to 12 or 20 is what I heard Danya say. That is designed around a pedestrian friendly environment, and it connects the surrounding developments, which are off-site, you know, the apartments behind it, which will also redevelop, and the neighborhood behind it that is increasing its level of intensity through small scale development that we've seen. There's been a couple of cases for the Planning Commission to the bus rapid transit station and to the amenities and into the shopping without requiring somebody to kind of walk the long way around, walk along Western Boulevard and come back. It's about shortening those distances, also shortening the driving distances, shortening the distance to provide public services, and be a more resilient street grid so that we're not putting all of the traffic in this area through the intersection of Jones Franklin and Western Boulevard, where the bus rapid transit also has to operate reliably. So building out that street helps do that, but it also helps tie people to the amenities on either side, and if through the site and also from the site and the new people that will live or work on that site to the surrounding neighborhood. So it is about being connected when you're in the very middle of things.
Thanks, Jason. Any other discussion? Okay, Commissioner Lampman, I saw your hand first, then I got Commissioner Bennett second.
So what I'm sensing is that the city is trying to anticipate what redevelopment is going to look like, say, 10 years from now, and preemptively saying, okay, if the higher density does come, a street will be required. And so you're trying to figure out the best way to fold that into something that's going to be preserved today to make way for that future perceived development. Trying to put something in stone, getting ahead of the curve. Okay, I see the challenge, and I've been listening to what Chairman Fox has been suggesting, and same with Commissioner Miller. I'm on the same page of the direction that they're heading in. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Lampman. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. Travis was about to say something a little while ago. I just wanted to hear what he was going to add.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm not sure that it will bring value to the conversation. I wanted to take a number of giant steps back and think about, what is before you today. This is not just a request for placing potential future street connections on Field Spring Lane or through the Plaza West Shopping Center. This is a larger comprehensive plan amendment that is geared towards fulfilling the vision for bus rapid transit along this corridor. So there will come a point in time in the very near future where the city is spending multi-millions of dollars to improve the transit system here. And in anticipation of that, these comprehensive plan amendments are being requested to fulfill that ultimate development opportunity that will take advantage of that investment. I mean, that's really what the lens or the perspective that city staff is looking through right now. The amount of money that will be spent versus the amount of development entitlement that will be envisioned in the future. So understand that this is a difficult conversation because there are a number of interested parties here that have very valid comments and feelings about street extensions, but I wanted to kind of reset the conversation a bit. Also, not to ratchet up the anxiety any, but I think that the deadline for discussion on this item is today. Danya, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that there's any more time for the committee to have further discussion on this item. So, you know, staff is certainly willing to help move you through the conversation and offer any type of alternative thinking here, but we don't have another month to spin our wheels in the committee.
Commissioner Lamb.
Thank you, Travis.
I'm sorry.
Chairman, do you mind if I just?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I figured you would give us some big overarching guidance that's at least helpful for me. And so what I'm trying to balance is exactly what you said. This is part of a much bigger picture, and I'm trying to see the macro scale. And at the same time, I mean, I have to hear what the people in the community and this shopping center owner are saying. And I noted that I just don't want to place an undue hardship on a specific owner for the greater good, even though the greater good is a good thing, particularly since this shopping center seems to serve a lot of underserved persons in the community. You know, I have to think about the impact on people who are already impacted a lot for the greater good. So that's, I think for me, that's why I'm spending a little bit more time probably than we normally would on one small piece of a much larger plan. I just, there's an equity issue, and I just want to make sure we're being equitable and serving the greater good at the same time. So thank you for the guidance. It's helpful.
Travis, thank you. That was helpful for me as well. I think from what we've seen in the past regarding you know, purchases of large parcels and the vision.
I want to kick you down to I was showing all the downtown spots.
Sorry, that you know, the vision that can be implemented with higher density. I can see this now being evaluated. I don't think that it'll create a financial hardship necessarily on the existing owners. I think that there is tremendous vision in this. It does go back to then Commissioner Bennett's comments about, you know, this is serving a current need in the community. And by adding the additional value, that also then might push people out of the community too. So yeah, this is challenging. I appreciate your comments, Travis, and bringing it back to a higher level. I see the investment in, so I feel better about where the current owners will be in terms of monetary value. I don't think that they will be impacted as in negative with this long run vision, but it'll definitely change the community a lot. Sorry, thank you.
I'm sorry, Daniel.
I just want to say one additional comment. I think, again, we didn't talk a lot about the TOD mapping, but as you're aware, the text change was approved, and city staff is working on applying the city-initiated transit overlay district zoning along western and southern corridors. And I do want to remind, because we have a station right here at the Jones-Franklin intersection, including the shopping center site is going to be on a TOD overlay. I know Madam Chair had brought up the parking minimums. I know we didn't have a full clarity on that yet on the text change side, but the intent with the TOD overlay is to give parking reductions, because to incentivize additional densities, again, providing bonuses for affordable housing, and the idea being that you want to prioritize transit use over driving. And so in some of these key areas, it's really crucial that we identify these as growth centers for supporting transit type of development or transit-oriented development. So some of these incremental decisions are really what will steer the future vision that Travis talked about, that every decision matters. And so it's over time and over a period of time with every property owner that the vision comes into reality. Just wanted to put that in there.
Commissioner Miller, and then Commissioner Fox.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to mention, I think that we might, let me do a quick math. There are 5, 6, 7, 8 of us. I think we're going to lose 2 of us by 5:45, but will we still have a quorum? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Will we down to 6?
I've got a hard stop at 6 myself.
Okay. But so you'll still have 6 people for 5:45. You have Commissioner Elder, you have to leave at 5:30. Is that right? Okay. Anyone else have to leave? Are we going to lose a quorum? No. I was just going to say, in the interest of time, I understand the big picture policy goals. I also think, channeling Commissioner O'Haver for a moment, these dotted lines tend to be problematic and kind of muck up the development process, because if frequently we will see somebody wanting to do something with their property, and if there's a dotted line bisecting it, then they'll have to go through a comp plan amendment, which takes a long time, and then we typically grant so that then they can move forward with it. It would be ideal to instead include policy guidance that specifically addressed this corridor or this Plaza West project and or the shopping center, and what that appropriate threshold should be, so that that classic problem doesn't present itself in the future. And personally, I would also like to see that the Field Spring widening, if that need doesn't spring into place until this other corridor gets created, that the Field Spring widening doesn't spring into place until the Plaza West gets triggered and the other things happen. But that being said, I'm not sure, based on our timing deadline, that we have, quite frankly, the time and resources at this moment to draft all of those issues. I'm not sure if is this an issue currently being studied in our Transportation Infrastructure Committee on what some of these appropriate thresholds might be. It's not. I think it's something that certainly deserves study, maybe in the recommendation of either a text change or a policy in place that helps us sort of come up with a list of different thresholds we could include in these instances on a case-by-case basis. But as it's currently written, I am not comfortable asking very much what Commissioner Bennett was talking about. I see the public good, but we're asking one individual, and in several cases, individual homeowners to bear the cost of that without any type of compensation or cost offset by that general public. So this is why I'm always reluctant to agree to those. Maybe an alternative might be that we could move forward with approving this comprehensive plan amendment, but removing out from that the street plan, and moving forward with no recommendation with respect to the street plan, just in the interest of timing as well.
Is that a motion?
I wanted to see if there's any general nods.
Yeah, we're all shaking our head. We're fine with that.
Great. Then with that, I would like to make a motion to, with respect to Comprehensive Plan CP 1021, to recommend that the full commission approve the comprehensive plan with the exception of the street plan, and instead to vote out the street plan with no recommendation.
Commissioner Miller has made a motion. I see Chair Fox seconding that motion.
Second.
Second. Okay. Danya?
One quick question, and maybe Travis or someone can clarify. Is there a need to vote on the actual report, the full study report?
So it doesn't hurt, Danya, to answer your question,
Yes.
but I think the actual action here is the comprehensive plan amendments, which is what I heard a motion for.
Right. So I was asking if we need also separate vote for the report, because the recommendations are coming out of the report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we've got one motion now, and we'll make another motion based on those comments. So, Commissioner Bennett.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand. So making no recommendation on the street plan means it's going to the planning commission with no recommendation or to council?
Yes.
It's going to
Planning
the
commission.
planning commission. So we'll have an
Yes.
opportunity to do something with it at the planning commission?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay. So we've got a motion and a second. All in favor by show of hands. Those in opposition, seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Now, Danya, based on your comments, we need to make another motion based on the report. Is that correct? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion from the committee based off of getting a recommendation on the report. Chair Fox.
Motion to recommend to the full planning commission adoption of the Western Boulevard corridor study.
I'll second that motion. Those in favor by show of hands. Seeing all, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to our second case of the day, rezoning Z6821, 1624 Glenwood Avenue to the intersection of Fairview Road. Hannah Reckout from Planning and Development will give a staff presentation on this case. This is our first time seeing this case at the Committee of the Whole. Hannah, are you ready? Thank you.
Good afternoon. So this is case Z6821, request to rezone a portion of a parcel, about 2.2 acres, from CX3 UGCU to CX3 CU. The site is located within the Hillsborough Historic District, and the Raleigh Historic Development Commission voted unanimously to support the application. So the zoning in the area, as you can see, there is a clustering of mixed-use districts, the 5 Points area, and then the larger area around the site is largely residential. So some geographic context, this is near 5 Points area, north of downtown. As you saw in the zoning, there's commercial and some civic uses near this intersection, and then residential surrounding it. So to zoom in to the site itself, this is a northern portion of the parcel that also contains the Lone Rider brewery location. The whole parcel has frontage on both Fairview and Glenwood Avenue, and the subject portion of the parcel just has frontage on Fairview Road. And as you may be able to see from the aerial, what's on the site here is a parking area and then some outdoor seating. And here's some images of the site from its frontage on Fairview Road. It is a conditional use request. There is one proposed condition, which is that no more than one building shall be built on the site. The current zoning is a conditional use district that has a number of conditions that include limits on total buildable area and limits the uses to office-like uses. So the change, there's really two main changes here. The removal of the urban general frontage, which affects a little bit the potential build out, and then the uses that are permitted. The request would allow commercial uses outside of the office category to be located on the site. So the location of the site does give it a higher walk score, bike score, and transit score than the city as a whole. And there's a lower cost to transportation and a higher proximity to jobs. The site does have bus access. 2 routes go through this area. There'd be a minimal impact to the housing supply, but potentially a small decrease in the potential units on the site. And no guaranteed subsidized units, but the proposed zoning would permit a variety of housing types, smaller units and smaller lots than citywide average, and there is transit access. And then analysis of the surrounding area population shows a lower proportion of people of color, low-income residents, and those who are linguistically isolated than the city. So on the future land use map, this site is designated neighborhood mixed use. This is a category that aims to provide neighborhood serving, commercial uses, as well as residential uses, and most closely aligns with the NX district. The request for CX does permit some uses not permitted in NX, and would permit some uses that are limited use in neighborhood mixed use as just permitted by right. So for that reason, the request is inconsistent with the future land use map. And there are a few designations on the site from the urban form map. One is the mixed use center that's centered on the 5 Points intersection. And then the other is a core transit area, which is from the future northern BRT. And so both of those would recommend a frontage, hybrid or urban, depending on context. And the request does not include one, removes an urban frontage. And so that request is inconsistent with the urban form map as well. And so overall, the case is inconsistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan. There are a few policies that the case is consistent with. These focus on having a mix of uses and mixed use centers, and encouraging development in a nodal pattern, as the request would increase the type of uses that are permitted in this area, possibly allowing a use to maybe expand rather than find a different site somewhere else. And there are some inconsistent policies. There are a couple topics here. The future land use map is one already discussed, and then commercial impacts of the request. And then the third topic is on the urban design front of no frontage, and the development that would allow, not aligning with urban design guidelines. So that is the conclusion of the staff presentation. Your deadline for action is at the end of March. So you have a few upcoming, these are committee whole meeting dates that would fall between that time. So to answer any other questions you have.
Thanks, Hannah. At this time, I'd like to hear from the applicant. I believe Isabel Maddox, on behalf of the applicant, is ready to give a presentation.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, I'm Isabel Maddox, PO Box 946 Raleigh 27602. I'm here on behalf of the property owner, Five Winds LLC, which is the family LLC, which owns that property and previously operated the Point Restaurant, which is, right here on Glenwood at 5 Points. The owner now leases the space to the Lone Rider Bar and Restaurant, and has been doing that for the last, for, I guess, since sometime in 2021. So first slide, please. Just to give you some context, I mean, Hannah did a pretty good job. That's Glenwood out here on the left, Fairview coming on the top of the parcel on the right. The BP station at 5 Points, you see that identified. Lone Rider is our parcel, or the bigger parcel. The Rialto is down Glenwood a little bit. But we're not really trying to rezone the entire Lone Rider parcel, just a part of that. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that is the part that we're seeking to rezone. And this property, the rear part of this property is purely parking lot, service location, and used for some outdoor dining activities. And it has been used that way for close to 20 years, and there's no redevelopment planned. There's just a quirk in the system that we have to fix. And so that's why we're here today, just to try to continue on as they have been doing on this property for many years. Because recently the city discovered some zoning conditions that had been in place since 1997, but had never really been enforced, and actually restrict this part of this parcel to office uses, despite the fact that restaurant uses have been going on here for at least 18 years. So it's really important to understand the timeline here. If you go to the next slide, we have a little timeline. So in 1997, the property was rezoned for office uses, and it has a few other conditions in there that have never been enforced. And I'll get to that in a minute. In 2004, the Point Restaurant opened with all applicable city permits. It was, very popular restaurant. In 2009, the city approved the comprehensive plan, which designated this property as neighborhood mixed use. And that's important for why we're inconsistent. In 2013, Five Winds LLC, the current property owner, acquired the property. They had leased it for the previous 9 years, and they actually bought it in 2013. And in 2014, they went to the city and got necessary permits to do a deck. And the deck is, there's one deck behind where the Point or the Lone Rider is, and there's another deck that's actually behind the BP station, but it's on this subject lot. So they got whatever permits they needed to build that deck, and they started using it to serve, restaurant patrons, and people liked the outside aspect of it. In 2016, the property was rezoned. This is both the frontage piece on Glenwood as well as our subject piece to CX3 UG. And now our piece had the CU, which is the conditions. And those conditions were from 1997. Nobody really looked at those very carefully, I don't think, because nobody said anything to anybody about it, that we had some conditions that made the operation of this property illegal. In 2020, after fighting COVID for a while, the Winslows decided they were going to close up shop. And they then have leased the property to the Lone Rider. Then in the summer of 2021, they sought to they're not actually expanding the outdoor dining. They were just going to update it somewhat. And that when that permit was issued, it came back that no, there's some conditions that preclude this use of this property, and they're very surprised. So they came to me and we filed this zoning case. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see what some of those conditions were. No dumpsters on the site. There are at least 3 dumpsters back there. Usage shall be limited to office uses. Well, this is a restaurant use. It's been going on since for sure 2004. Upon the issuance of the CO, control gates shall be placed at the alley at Glenwood and on the Fairview Road, and no control gates are in place. And also they posted to post signs closing the parking lot at 9 p.m. That's never been the case. So anyway, what we're really trying to do here is remove these conditions. They don't really fit, and they never have. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk about that in just a minute. So the 2 things we're really trying to do are get rid of those conditions that don't make sense, have never been enforced, and really are contrary to what is being done and has been done in this property. The other thing is to get rid of the frontage designation. So, the part of the parcel that's on Glenwood will continue to have the urban general frontage, which is appropriate. That building's on a major street. They're very close to the street. It works. The frontage on Fairview doesn't really work. Should they redevelop, they would be required to have a building occupy at least 70% of their street frontage. So there's 144 feet of street frontage. They'd have to do a building that was 101 feet wide, and you can see the little box there. That's how the building front would have to be. And you can see that would never make much sense for there. Not only would it be a building that was shaped very oddly, but it would also block any access point. So it's really impractical. And it doesn't seem to serve any great purpose there. I have gotten many variances of frontage requirements all over the city for the Board of Adjustment. And I feel confident that if I went to the Board of Adjustment with this one, I could probably get a variance. But what I'm saying to you is don't put something there that we'll have to get a variance for at some point in the future. It just doesn't really do anything. We've got the frontage on the important street, and we'd just like to have that rear area without being subject to a frontage requirement. So that's really what we're trying to do here. I mean, yes, we're inconsistent with the future land use map, but the reality is the city came in after designating that as neighborhood mixed use on the comprehensive plan in 2009. they came in 2013 and zoned it CX, which was immediately in conflict. And so they created that conflict. We're not doing anything to create a conflict there. The urban form map, we're in conflict with that because of the frontage issue, and we've discussed that. So really, we're just trying to clean this, vestige of the past up that nobody even knew about. And we'd like your support. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer those.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Ira, do we have anyone sign up from the public to speak?
Yes, sir. We have two. First, we'll go to Mary Gibson.
Hi, this is Mary Gibson. I am at 1804 Fairview, so I'm about a block from the site. I came primarily to understand what the intent of the rezoning was and to do my best to express the concerns if it were to enhance the ability to have outdoor electronically, I forget what it's called, it's said the right way, to have electronically amplified music, because we've had difficulties with that with the site. And I don't object to the outdoor eating and, and non-amplified music, but it is disturbing to the residents to have amplified music. So I didn't see anything what this would do to cause that. I just didn't understand what the zoning was giving them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mabel, would you like to speak to the outdoor amplified sound that the member of the public just mentioned?
I could speak to that if you would.
I'm sorry, Ms. Maddox.
I didn't know if you wanted Ira, but
No. I'm sorry. I meant the applicant.
we have the same initials. Anyway, so yeah, here's the deal. When the Lone Rider first opened back, I think it was in the summer of 2021, they had 1 or 2 outdoor performances of a live band. It was COVID and they were trying to get their business, going. The operator did not understand that that's a no-no. He now does understand that. And so he has not done any more of those outdoor performances. He does have an amplified entertainment permit, which allows sound to be generated inside his building. And that's all he's doing. And he doesn't have any future plans, to do live music. You've got to get a special use permit from the city council, basically. And he does not have that and doesn't have any plans to get that and doesn't have any plans to do outdoor performances, going forward. He had thought that was something permissible. And he thought, you read a lot about the city extending a lot of leeway to bars and restaurants during COVID. And I think he thought that would be okay. And, he's now realized he can't do that.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Ira, can you please present the next speaker from the public?
Sure. We have Timothy Kane. Tim, if you wouldn't mind your name and address.
Yes, Timothy Kane. I'm an attorney for Millstream Properties, the neighbor to the south, and my address is 124 St. Mary Street in Raleigh. We are more so interested in maintaining access to the fire hydrants located on Fairview Road to service the rear of several properties, including our own and Rialto Theater to the south of us, in the event of a fire, than we are opposed to this particular rezoning request. Setbacks of 5 feet could essentially cut off such access if developed with a allowed new building in this currently unimproved space, and any such new improvements would effectively sever current connectivity, access to existing utilities, and potentially impact public safety. We would fully support this petition if conditioned upon continued and defined access at the rear and east of the Five Winds property to ensure continued access by emergency and fire agencies and continued connectivity. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Would the applicant like to respond to those comments about access to the fire hydrants?
Yeah, I will be glad to respond to that. First of all, I think this is a private matter, a private contractual matter between property owners. I understand that because I've had discussions with Mr. Kane, he sought an easement from my client to bring his fire hoses across that property. We've said, a temporary permission, that's fine, but we can't give him a permanent easement. I think he does have another option, which he's got an alley access from Glenwood, and he's got enough width. I'm told he has enough width on that alley to get a fire truck in. If he were to remove, I understand that property owner has installed some air conditioning units which extend into that alley, and it's narrow. And so with the air conditioning units in that location, they can't fit the fire truck through there. They could move the AC units up top. And to me, that's a private property that needs to deal with handling their own utilities and access through their own property. If I don't know that we can come to a negotiated deal on that, but it's possible. But again, that would be two private property owners talking and figuring out whether we're really willing to grant access rights over our private property. So I don't think we've done anything to make his situation worse. I think they've expanded their bar, and so fire hoses don't reach now from Glenwood, a fire truck on Glenwood, to the back of their addition. But I mean, they probably should have thought through beforehand rather than requiring an easement to try to force us to grant them an easement over this back property.
So what I'm hearing is that you're not willing to grant or put a condition in on this case regarding the fire hydrant access.
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioner Miller.
Thank you. I was going to see if Mr. Kane would be willing to respond to that. I understand Ms. Maddox's general position to this, but it does appear that an alley is being cut off. And I would think that public safety and providing access to emergency and fire agencies is something that is, one of the prongs of our test is whether something is reasonable and in the public interest. And if something is creating a potential fire hazard and public safety issue, that's something we would need to address. So could Mr. Kane respond to the option, the other potential for a fire truck to come in to the south?
I would be glad to. The alleyway that we're talking about, I believe, is 10 feet wide. The modern fire trucks will not fit down that alley anyway. And on top of that, that alleyway is not a public alleyway, to my knowledge. That's also owned by Five Winds.
Well, I don't think there's any reluctance to grant you an easement down that alley, if that would help. I don't think there's a problem there. I do think there's some. I had understood it was public, but I can't tell you that for a fact.
The additional question that I have there is based on the location of fire hydrants. You've got two that are right there at the north and northeast section of the subject property that we're developing. And then you've got one that is southwest of the Rialto Theater, and it's across the road. And the problem is if you have to go around an elbow with a hose to get to the rear of any of those properties, you run into an issue with the available length of hose.
But did your clients not just add on to the back of that building?
They replaced an existing deck and they did widen it by 1.5 feet. It still does not reach into the alleyway or beyond the property line, but they had to do that because of the poor condition of the footings in the previous deck.
It seems like whether fire emergency vehicles could have access here is a knowable thing, whether it's from the north or from the south. Could staff provide some guidance on whether someone from staff or the fire department could weigh in on this issue?
I know we don't have anyone from fire on the call. It's a question that we can get answered by them, and we certainly would want their input on it.
Sure. Maybe it'd be helpful then to get that input for a subsequent meeting. It looks like we have time.
But I do think it's important for the Planning Commission to recognize that this is a private property to private property issue. And I think it's been going along fine. They've not had this issue until I've just heard it raised in the last month as an issue. They've asked for an easement. We said a temporary right was fine, but we could not grant an easement. But, you know, I don't know what has changed about their situation that this rezoning would potentially be affecting.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Commissioner Bennett, I saw your hand, and then Commissioner Lampman, I saw yours. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. I think what Isabel said at the very end sort of got to the heart of my question. I'm trying to understand what would change with this rezoning from the current condition to warrant the condition about the fire hydrant access. That's what I'm trying to understand. Anybody?
No, I share your sentiments, Commissioner Bennett. I don't understand myself.
I thought the issue was that the alley would be cut off from the north.
Can someone from staff answer?
Sure, this is Hannah Reckow. I don't believe there is any condition currently on the site that would address that access or that easement.
Yeah,
So my question is, what's changing that has Mr. Kane's client requesting this? That's what I'm trying to understand. What is changing with this rezoning that's going to block the access?
I think that might be a
Can I
good
speak to that?
question for the president.
Speaking to that, I guess the biggest issue is the unknown aspect of what is planned. I mean, the rezoning requests the ability for one building, and the setbacks are 5 feet on the side and rear, if I'm remembering correctly. And the eventuality of putting a building there would effectively limit access by fire or emergency. And going back to the question of, two private parcels, I completely agree with Isabel. It is that we are not asking for any servitude. We're not asking for any ability that's going to be granted to us. All that we're looking to do is ensure that there is a continued ability for fire department to lay a hose across the property.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Lampman, I saw your hand, and then Commissioner Rains.
So is there any access that will be cut off from some of the parking that it looks like can occur currently on the non-yellow site?
Are you asking me?
I guess I'm trying to understand like the implications of this if the site in question is to be fully developed, would the existing owners be able to access that parking in the back?
I think they could come through the alley on Glenwood.
But we've determined that that alley is only 10 feet.
I think it's wider than 10. I can't give you a dimension, but I've been told at the beginning, my client mentioned to me that the owners of this building had reached out to him asking for some sort of a right to use, to cross the property with fire hoses. And this just, literally happened in the last month. I don't think it had anything to do with the zoning case. I think it had to do with the fact that they, I think, made a possibly illegal addition to their property. And then when they came back in to get it permitted after the fact, there's a fire issue. And the fire department is saying you have to have some sort of easement because we can't reach the back of that new area from the street anymore. But when I was told they've got access through that alley and that a car can go through it, but that a fire truck was constrained because of the air conditioning units that, bump out into the alley.
Commissioner Raines, you have any comments?
Thanks, Chairman. Just a quick question. Kind of switching gears from the easement issue to screening. I didn't know if the applicant had any consideration of screening the dumpsters along Fairview.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Raines. Yes, I have talked with my client. You and I talked earlier in the week, and I've talked with my client, and she insists that she agrees that they would be willing to add a condition to screen the dumpster with an enclosure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or concerns from the committee? Seeing none, I'm hearing that there are extra conditions that may be added regarding screening. So what we'll do is we'll hold this case without further objection till our next committee of the whole meeting.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Could I ask that you refer it back to Planning Commission and with the understanding that we'll get a
Okay.
signed condition into Planning Commission before Planning Commission takes any action?
That's fine. That's fine. Commissioner Miller?
That procedure is fine. I was going to see if we could also have input from staff from the fire department, provide information as well.
Okay. So seeing no objection, we'll move this to the full Planning Commission for our later meeting scheduled. Moving on, I'm trying to see if we still have a quorum here. Let's see. I've got to go in about 10 minutes. And I just want to make sure we've still got our quorum. I think we will. Okay. So moving on to the third case of today, Capitol Boulevard North Quarter Plan. This is our second time hearing this case. John Anagnos, Commissioner Bennett.
Sorry, Chairman. I have to recuse myself from this one. So does that affect your quorum?
I think so.
I'm so sorry.
I believe so. What we'll do is.
Excuse me. It does not affect the quorum. We have enough for the meeting. If someone has to recuse themselves such that members eligible to vote are less than the quorum, you can still vote. Now, quite frankly, I don't know whether you have time to, given the fact that we're going to lose a quorum anyway at 6 o'clock, but the loss of a quorum because of a conflict or does not, you don't lose the quorum because a member cannot discuss a specific matter. So they have to recuse themselves. You can still discuss the matter. The vote could be, the total votes cast can be less than a quorum and it's still effective.
Okay. And we still have 5. So with that, let me see.
6 is required for a quorum is my understanding.
Okay. Commissioner Lampman.
I'm looking at the timeline on this one, February 16th. I don't know if we're going to have the ability to hear it in another committee of the whole. Do we need to schedule a special meeting, committee of the whole, maybe to wrap these final ones up?
So that's certainly a possibility for you. Alternatively, you could move it to the Planning Commission on February 8th and continue the discussion there. It's a pretty light agenda to date.
Yes. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up and head shakes. So let's move this to the February 8th full Planning Commission meeting. Moving on to our final case then in Z6021 Tryon Road. Hannah Rakow will give us a staff presentation on this case. Oh, okay. Hold on.
All right. Rezoning request Z6021. There's a request to rezone about 6¼ acres, currently zoned R1 and IX3 PL to IX3 CU. The site also has a few overlay districts that are applied, and the request is not asking to change those at all, so those would remain. So the zoning in the area is a mix. There is a considerable amount of residential, especially to the north and the west. And then along the Tryon Road frontage, especially going east, there are some IX districts as well. So the site location is south of I-40 and Lake Johnson. You can see the commercial and light industrial uses along Tryon Road to the east, and then residential uses to the west, and then farther west, you see the Dillard Drive area. Zooming into the site, you can see the adjacent townhome development, which is directly adjacent to the north and the west. The site is 4 parcels. The 2 that are on the western part of the site are currently zoned IX3PL, and then there's 2 R1 parcels that are flag lots. You can see the long driveway back to the detached house that is currently on the site. Some images of the frontage on Tryon Road. There are a number of zoning conditions that are a part of the request. The first 2 pertain to the uses that are permitted on the site. Condition 1 speaks to the 2 western parcels that are currently have IX zoning. This condition prohibits some of the uses that would be normally permitted. As you can see, it does include residential and a number of vehicle-oriented uses. Condition 2 speaks to the 2 flag lots currently zoned R1, and this condition sets the uses to those that are permitted in an office mixed-use district, plus light manufacturing, light industrial, and warehouse and distribution. Condition 3 speaks to a setback, building setback on a portion of the northern boundary of 50 feet. And then there are conditions limiting height to 2 stories, total build out 200,000 square feet. And then the last 2 speak to landscape buffers. Condition 6 requires 20-foot landscape buffer along the northern boundary of the 2 R1 parcels. And then condition 7 speaks to a similar landscape area on the eastern boundary that's shared with the adjacent residential. And that last one also includes a requirement for a wooden fence. So the change in zoning, you do see a decrease in residential build out. That is stemming from a prohibition on residential uses on half the site. And then the conditions are controlling total build out area, that 100,000 square feet. And then overall, it's expanding the area that light industrial uses and other commercial uses can locate on the site. The area has sort of lower walk and transit scores than average bike score, average job proximity, no bus service to this site in this area, a lowering of the number of housing units that could be built on the site, no guaranteed subsidized units, but smaller units allowed and lots allowed. And then the surrounding area is a smaller proportion of the populations you see here. The designation on the future land use map for the site is office and residential mixed use. This recommends low impact uses like office and residential, generally intended to be a transition designation between more residential areas and more intensive areas. The request does limit some of the uses that are permitted on the site, but generally permits light industrial uses throughout the site. And so for that reason, it's inconsistent with the future land use map. There's no urban form guidance. And overall, inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. Some of the consistent policies promise for a little bit additional buffering than would be required by the code. And then the request does sort of allow the existing industrial land use to expand and preserve its use where it is. And then inconsistent policies. Few topics here are future land use map inconsistency, the commercial development impacts. The conditions do speak to some of those. They prohibit some of the higher impact uses, but leave others. And then retail uses being ancillary in office and residential mixed use areas, and then the location of industrial areas and mitigation of industrial land use impacts. The site is adjacent to residential, so there's a sort of compatibility conflict there. That is the end of the staff presentation. Again, your deadline is the end of March, and you've got a few upcoming meetings in the meantime.
So it looks like we've lost our chairperson, which takes us below the quorum for the meeting. So what that means is you can't take any action on this case. And what I would suggest is that staff will just place this on your next committee of the whole meeting agenda, which is in February, and I'll give you the specific date here in a moment. That would be February 24th. Apologies to the applicant who's on the line, but we can't continue with any conversation without a quorum. So this case will come back on February 24th at committee of the whole. Yes, ma'am.
Am I able to ask any policy questions or like procedure questions outside of not having quorum?
I would say not, because technically the meeting has ended. If you have general procedural questions or policy questions, feel free to email them to staff, and we can answer them between now and the next meeting. Sorry about that, y'all.